not everybody spoke, but the people who did speak all spoke out against. Interesting, Jason Gibbs didn't say anything, and he's one of the most pro-Israel of all of them. But Cameron, Marcia, and Lorene all spoke out and said they're not gonna tolerate any kind of hate in this community, and especially anti-Semitism. And so, and then Lorene made a special point of saying everybody go out and make sure to vote against Gascon. She actually said that. He said, go out and vote and make sure he doesn't come back. So, anyways, but John is right. When John said that the officers, it's very disheartening for them to arrest people and for them to be released, and they know it. I mean, there's nothing they can do. They arrest the people, they get released, they arrest the same person over and over again. And I talked to our captain Diaz, and he said it's just disheartening. And they're losing a lot of officers. They're quitting. They're very overworked. It's created a vicious cycle where they're working maximum amounts of overtime, but it's also disheartening because when the work you're doing all goes for nothing, where you arrest somebody and then they're immediately released, and you arrest them again and you arrest them again for the same things. Of course, they're doing it because they know they're not going to go to jail, and it's just disheartening because you're trying to do your job and you're not able to do it, and no one likes to do their job and find out they can't do their job. So we're losing officers. They're moving out of state. It's just created a bad cycle. And we're about 64%, maybe it's less now. We were 64% staffed. So it means that, by the way, if we have a problem, we're not going to get help.
Well, the same thing's happening in New York. Letting go of not Trump, I don't care about that. But what happened with the protesters in Colombia? Same thing, the same issue. But one thing they did mention I thought was interesting, because they did bring up Kessler, that they are not happy, right, that the DA Ventura is not escalating it to a hate crime.
Yeah.
Not much they can do about it. Nothing, especially Sherman. Oh God.
There's not there. Look, I told you this. You were with me. I told you they weren't going to charge him with a hate crime. I told you that. They're going to come up later and say, "Oh, by the way, there's a hate crime." It's unbelievable. How is that not a hate crime?
Still, 9 innings.
Mike just gave us a baseball update, but yes, complete game. There you go. How many pitches though, Mike? Oh, that's a lot. Anyways, yeah, so that's the update on security. Somebody emailed me. It was so funny. Somebody who went on our Israel trip a few years ago. They used to come to they never lived in Santa Clarita, but they lived in Sylmar. They used to come up here for stuff for several years. And I think they actually paid membership for a couple of years. But they live now further away. And he emailed me last night and said, I think it's time for Hebrew schools to stop teaching people just Baruch Atah Adonai. It's time to start teaching them how to defend themselves, and he was responding like everybody to the Pico. I mean, he said, this Pico Robertson thing is just, so I sent him our gun training. I sent him our Krav Maga classes. I said, we've been doing this for months. I said, I agree with you, but it was interesting that, a lot of people are responding to that. A lot of people are feeling like we have to do something more, but we have been, and we will continue to do that. But, it was a wake-up call a little bit for me to see, and John saw it too, Paul Kessler's blood on the street. I don't know what to tell you. Jewish guy got killed for holding an Israeli flag in our neck of the woods, 25 miles, 30 miles as the crow flies from where we're sitting right now. That happened. It's a fact. It's happened. It's history. You can't argue it. You can't say it's theoretical. It might happen. It happened. And we had a JCC shooting 9 miles from where we're standing right here that miraculously no child was killed in, but was another act of violence against us. And it's not like it's theoretical. It happened. So it doesn't mean we live in fear, but it also means that we have to do what we have to do to protect ourselves. So back to what we talked about last week, which is a little connected to that, which is communal prayer and being together. And we talked last week about the fact that communal prayer was seen as throughout Jewish history is something we had to do. We had to come together. And you're going to read a couple of interesting things today. One of them, I think, is actually kind of humorous. I think it's intended to be humorous, but I'm not 100% sure. It's one of those kind of things that's funny, but it's funny because it's true. And it's not funny, haha, but it's funny, and you're going to say, that's always been funny, and that's always been true. So we'll get to that. But let's start again. We're talking about communal prayer and how important it is. This text we're going to start with today was from Reish Lakish, who we've read about a few times. The rabbi, the teacher, who actually was also a bandit slash maybe gladiator fighter. So again, picking up the theme of Jews who knew how to, well, in his case, use a blade. Reish Lakish, he said, one who has a synagogue in his city or nearby his city, the word nearby could be an interpretation, but in his city or nearby his city, but does not enter to pray there is called an evil neighbor. As it is stated, thus said the Lord, as for all my evil neighbors who touch my inheritance, which I have caused my people Israel to inherit, behold, I will pluck them off from their land. This is the whole quote, and will pluck the house of Judah up from among them. And that's from the prophet Jeremiah. So one who only touches but does not enter the place of prayer, my inheritance is considered an evil neighbor. And furthermore, he is punished in that he causes himself and his children to go into exile, as is stated. Behold, I will pluck them up from their land and will pluck the house of Judah up from among them, which is the whole quote, which is why it showed you there, because they actually picked it up, and that is in the text. So what did they say is a bad neighbor? A bad neighbor is a Jew who doesn't go to synagogue when he has a synagogue in his community. If he doesn't have a synagogue in his community, he can't go to synagogue all the time. But if there is one in his community, he's supposed to go. Now, what's interesting about this is they use the word Beit Knesset, which means a house of assembly. It literally is the word synagogue, a place where people gather. That's different from a house of study, which we're about to see, because there is a discussion about whether you're supposed to pray in a Beit Midrash or you're supposed to pray in a synagogue. But here they're talking about specifically a place of assembly. By the way, the same thing went for churches in the ancient world. There were discussions in the Christian community of whether you're supposed to go to a church in a house or whether you're supposed to go a little different than a place of study, which also, again, tells you a little bit about the way the Jewish community was organized, which was organized around yeshivas. It's organized around places of study or a place of communal gathering. And of course, the original places of communal gathering for the churches, for larger churches, when the Roman Empire became more Christian, was a basilica. A basilica does not mean a church. A basilica actually means a building for the government. It is the city hall, if you will. So originally in Latin, basileus means the council or the king, or the governor, and the basilica is the place where they meet. And so these buildings, which were originally kind of civic centers, became churches, but that's not where the original churches were. And the Latin word actually preserves that idea that these were not places of prayer, but actually places of gathering. And we do the same thing. The word Beit Knesset means a place of assembly. Maybe not for the sake of government assembly, because, well, for most of the Roman era, we didn't have civic authority, but maybe some of these places were more like JCCs or community centers and not just a synagogue. Based on the archaeology and based on what we've seen, like in Sapori and some of these other places, the synagogue itself was not necessarily a place of study. It was almost like a separate building for the community to gather together. And so if you have one of those kind of buildings in your community and you don't go to it, the rabbis are condemning you. Now, you and I might be thinking, well, we're just a Jew who doesn't go to synagogue. That's probably actually what they're talking about is not that. That's the interesting thing. Like most people who read this, and even like Orthodox people who read it, I think maybe intentionally don't read it the way it's supposed to be read. This is not a discussion of Jews who don't go to synagogue. This is an issue of Jews who sit in the Beit Midrash and don't go to synagogue. Meaning they don't pray with the community. They pray with their other students and teachers. And so the rabbis here in the Talmud are actually encouraging people to get out of their houses of study to go to the synagogue. It's not like telling people who are not going to synagogue. It's actually telling people who are praying and who are religious and who are observant, but who aren't going to the synagogue to pray. They're praying on their own. They're not praying with the people. So they're actually talking to religious Jews who aren't praying in a synagogue, which is still, by the way, an issue. Still an issue in the Orthodox world today. Not in our community, but in Orthodox community, it's very much an issue. So, what are they talking about here? The Gemara relates that when the sages told Rabbi Yochanan, and again, Rabbi Yochanan lived at the same time as Reish Lakish, that there are elders in Babylonia, he was confounded and said, "It is written, so that your days will be lengthened and the days of your children upon the land the Lord swore to your forefathers to give them, like the days of heaven on earth. Lengthened in Eretz Israel, but not outside of the land. Why then do the residents of Babylonia live long lives?" When they told him that the people in Babylonia go early in the morning and go late in the evening to the synagogue, he said that was effective for them in extending their lives. And so they threw in this little story about another one of the rabbis of the time, Rabbi Yochanan, who said, he was told people in Babylonia, Jews in Babylonia, live long lives. So if only people, and again, the text from Deuteronomy says that people will have their lives lengthened in the land of Israel, why are people living long lives outside the land of Israel? But he's told it's because the people in Babylonia go to the synagogue. They go to the Beit Knesset. In Babylonia, yeah. And what's interesting, of course, is that they're making the case for the fact that Jews who live outside the land of Israel, when they follow the rules, they're going to have long lives too. So they just threw that out. Now that makes sense, since this is the Babylonian Talmud. And so they're living in Babylonia. And so the idea that these people, even the early, and this Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they live, 200, 300 years before these rabbis are quoting this. They're saying, oh, well, 200, 300 years ago, the people, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they lived in the land of Israel. So there was already Babylonian community. They knew about the Babylonian community. They interacted. We know that Rabbi Hillel actually came from Babylonia to live in the land of Israel. There were already a lot of Jews living, a substantial amount before the destruction of the temple, the second temple. Going back to the destruction of the first temple, there were Babylonian Jews, right? Jews in Iran and Iraq. And so these Jews lived long lives. And so the answer is, it's because they go to synagogue. And they go to synagogue early in the morning and late in the evening. They're there all time. They're there when they're supposed to be there. They spend time there. Now, here's a wonderful tangential discussion now. Because we're talking about synagogues. And now we're about to not talk about synagogues. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said to his sons, "Go early and go late, and enter the synagogue so that your lives will be extended." And Rabbi Acha, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, "Upon what verse is this based? As it is stated, happy is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, guarding at my doorposts." From Proverbs. And the reward for doing so is written in the next verse. "For whoso finds me, who finds me, language is kind of weird here. Who finds me finds life and obtains the favor of the Lord." Me meaning God, capital M. So you find me, you find life, right? Well, that's nice. It's a nice idea. And where do you find God? You find God in the synagogue. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Find God in the synagogue. So keep that in the back of your mind. The rabbis just threw out that you find God in the synagogue. Well, you found God in the temple, Jerusalem. So it makes sense. The synagogue's kind of a micro version of that. So, oh, okay. So God's in the synagogue. Okay, we'll keep that, again, bank that away. Because we're going to come back to that. But we're about to go on a little Talmudic journey. And this one I think is kind of funny and interesting, if you will. Based on this verse, Rabbi Chisda said, a person should always enter two doorways into the synagogue. The statement is unclear, right? Two doorways into the synagogue? The Gemara asks, does it enter your mind? Of course it's going to, that Rav Chisda meant that one should enter two doorways literally? What if a synagogue only has one doorway? How do you come in two doorways? Rather, amend the statement, make the statement read that Rav Chisda meant that one should enter a distance of two doorways into the synagogue and then pray. In entering a distance of two doorways, one fulfills the verse, guarding at my doorposts in the plural. So the word doorposts is used as a plural, meaning two doors. But he says, interpret it to be you come in into the synagogue. So you're not supposed to stand in the back of the synagogue. John always likes to sit in the back. You guys kind of sit, they'll float in the back, but sometimes you're over here. But you come in at least into the synagogue. People aren't supposed to stand by the door. Not supposed to stand by the door. Like you're eager to get out of here, right? So if you come in, you join the community, you feel part of the community. So you shouldn't feel like you stand by the door. So don't read two doors, read two door lengths. Come in at least the length of two of where the door would open. So the door doesn't open in on you. Now they're going to talk about this word find. And this is interesting. This is really interesting. There's a few funny things in here. I love this one. We'll see what you have to say about it. Having mentioned the verse, who finds me finds life, from Proverbs, the Gemara seeks to clarify its meaning. It is said, for this, let every pious man pray to you in the time of finding, which is from Psalm 32. We're going to come to that pretty soon, that the overflowing waters may not reach him. That line for this, let the pious pray to you in the time of finding, matzah. In Hebrew, the word matzah with an aleph means to find. Not matzah with a hay. Matzah with a hay is matzah. But matzah with an aleph is to find. Is to find. That's the root, matzah. Rabbi Hanina said, yeah.
Is that why we hide the alpha coming?
No, but that's a good one. Finding it is a matzah, is a metzia. We're going to get to that, by the way. Right? Rabbi Hanina said, the time of finding refers to the time one must find a wife, and that one should pray to find a suitable woman to marry. So what's your find? Your find is your wife. As it is said, he who finds matzah, a wife, finds good and obtains the favor of God, from God. And that's also from Proverbs. He who finds a wife finds good. So the word matzah is used there. Matzah, right there. It says matzah isha, matzah tov. He who finds a wife has found happiness and has won the favor of the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? You find your wife. So what is it? What are they talking about? What's the time of finding? When you find God? It just said when you find a wife. What's the greatest miracle? Finding a wife. Why are you looking at me like that, John? It's better than finding a matzah, that's for sure. Now, just so you know, for those of you who are too young to speak Yiddish regularly, or to have spoken it regularly, or even heard it, you might know that we have a great Yiddish word, a metzia. You heard that word before?
Oh, yeah.
Metzia. What does it mean? Somebody. Hello? When you say
Like, what's a big deal? What's a big messiah?
metzia, yes, that's how it's used when they say it's what's the big deal, but that's used sarcastically, right?
Okay.
That's used sarcastically. What's the deal? It is a deal. A metzia is a find, right? A metzia, this is why everybody who spoke Yiddish knew this word. It's such a metzia. People would walk around and go, oh, it's a metzia. Why? Because I found it at Costco. It was a metzia. It was a find. Jewish people love to have a good metzia. It was funny. I was looking up, how people have used it lately, because there are people. The one person I found used it. It was funny. very Talmudic. RuPaul was quoting Judge Judy. And RuPaul said, I just heard Judge Judy use a great word, Metzia. So I'm not kidding. Well, not only is she Jewish, she throws out Yiddish all the time.
Yeah.
So, oh, no, I'm going to show you because no, I mean, I like her, but I don't watch it. She's funny. No, I'm going to show you. She's actually weighed in a little bit here. I'll show you because I was looking at who's using this, who uses the word Metzia. Here it's right here. RuPaul posted. Last week, Judge Judy used the Yiddish word Metzia, which means a bargain, a real find, or a lucky break. So yeah, you're right. Sometimes we use it, Cheryl, we use it sarcastic. Was it Cheryl who said that, right? Sometimes we use it sarcastically. We say, oh, it's no Metzia. But it only works if you know that the word Metzia means it's a really good deal. Now, that's why I would say that it was one of the more popular Yiddish words that, almost, I guess it didn't quite make it like schlep or kvetch or some of the other words that have made their way into English. But it's a super important word for Jews. Yiddish? Yeah, I don't know enough Yiddish to do it. I would love to have one, but it is a great language. And obviously the word Metzia and a lot of the Yiddish words that we love come from Hebrew, right? So Metzia comes from Hebrew. And I've made this point before. One of the reasons why Metzia, there's two great words that Yiddish, that are used in Yiddish that, I used to hear my, grandparents or whoever would throw out these words a lot. A Metzia, which is a find, and a Machaya, right? A Machaya has the word chai in it, right? Machaya is something that gives you life. So something that's a Machaya is like an invigorating experience. Now, sometimes the Metzia can also be a Machaya, right? Because if you found her like a really good deal on a spa treatment or something, or it's a Machaya, or a really good, I don't know, probably for my grandfather, a really good piece of brisket was a Machaya and a Metzia. And a Metzia.
Nice, cool, finally.
Yes. Oh, it's a Machaya. Such a Machaya, right? So Metzia and Machaya were words that were used all the time. And they're great words that just kind of disappeared. But Machaya, yeah. So it has the word chai in it, gives life. Metzia is a find. And I will put forth, by the way, that the reason why Metzia was such an important word, and I've said this before in different forms, but Jewish people, the idea that Jewish people are cheap, I find offensive and for many reasons, but it's also not true. I don't find that Jewish people are cheap. I've said this before. I find that Jewish people want to have a good deal. Jewish people do not like to find out that somebody paid less than the same thing that they did. That drives us crazy. And it's not a matter of the money. And this is why I'm telling you, it's not about money for us. It's a matter of sechel, another Yiddish word, Hebrew word. It's a matter of using your mind properly, like not being taken advantage of. And for us, that's our thing. What? Yeah.
Called my brother.
Well, that's a different issue, right?
He was trying to bargain.
The bargain, yeah. Well, I'm telling you right now. I don't know he was Jewish.
I don't know. Well, looking at my brother.
He looks pretty Jewish.
I think pretty good.
But yeah, it's just not true. Jewish people are not cheap, but they will not like to be taken advantage of when it comes, especially when it comes to dollars. So that's why I think it's kind of a funny thing that people go, no, they're not. We're not. It's more of a reflection of our intelligence than anything else. And I find that Jewish people are even more likely to spend money, but they really don't want to. They don't want to be spending more than they should. That sometimes becomes a compulsion because then it's like, stop going crazy about it. You're not an idiot just because somebody paid $100 less for this than you did. Just get over it. But for us, it is a reflection of our wisdom, if you will.
What's the word? Nacha?
No, what, nachas? Nachas is pride.
Same.
Yeah.
It's pride.
Yes, it's a limit. Yeah. But nachas is actually oftentimes we get from somebody else. It's the pride we get from our kids but it can be. I mean, anything you take pride in, you get nachas, but it's really from somebody else or really almost exclusively for our kids. But let's get back to this thing about finding. So what's a metzia when it comes to a woman? Look at this. Like this, I love this one. In Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, right? The custom was that when a man married a woman in Israel, because remember, they're in Babylonia, so they're reminding people, hey, back in Israel, it was a custom to say, when he married a man, when a man married a woman, they would ask, matzah or motza? In other words, they would ask the groom whether the appropriate passage for his wife from Proverbs would begin, matzah, the one we just read, he who finds a good wife, finds a wife, finds good, and obtains the favor of the Lord, or whether the more appropriate verse is the one from Ecclesiastes, which says, with motza, as it is said, and I find the woman more bitter than death. So, is she a good find, or she is more bitter than death? And here's the line: it says motse or motze, which is not matzah. It's the same words though, right? And it's the same root. It's a find, but it's a find that she's more bitter than death. That's the line from Ecclesiastes. So now, Ecclesiastes is a different author. It's written traditionally by Solomon, and we're going to talk about these wisdom books when we get to Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. But Ecclesiastes has got some very harsh stuff in it. And the fact that maybe Solomon or somebody like Solomon would have said this, look, the guy was married to 1,000 women. So granted, some of them are going to be traps. Some of them are going to be more bitter, bitter than death. But again, Ecclesiastes. Yeah. So this is definitely finding a woman not a good one, not finding a woman who's not good. Unfortunately, it doesn't say any woman or random woman or a bad woman. It says a woman. So it doesn't, it's not a great line about women. But the funny part, of course, is, do we say matzah or motza? Do we say, is she a matzah? Or is she a motza, or is she a matzah? So it's very funny. Matzah or motza. She's a find, but what kind of find is she? Is she a find of wonderful stuff, or is she a find of bitter than death? So what do you think about that? That's an interesting little line. I think it's supposed to be a little bit funny. I don't think it's meant to be like 100% serious, but they said, look, they played off the language there. So that's one thing. That's one of the funnier things, I think, that we'll see today. But there's another funny thing coming up as we talk about great finds. Rabbi Natan said the time of finding, the matzah here, refers to the time of finding Torah. As it is stated in a verse relating to the Torah, he who finds me finds life, and the Torah is the object most sought. Oh, that's nice. That's a nice line, right? That again is a line from Ecclesiastes as well. So that's finding Torah. Well, that's nice, but that's not the end. That's not the end. Nope. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak said, the time of finding refers to death. One should pray that when death comes, he will leave the world peacefully, as is stated. Issues totsaot of death, which comes from Psalms. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak's statement is based on the etymological similarity between totsaot and matzah, right? So the line from Proverbs from Psalms says, God is for us a God of deliverance. God, the Lord, provides an escape from death. Now, if you look at the original, maybe intention of the word Proverbs, it's that we get out. Hatzaot, which again, the word yotze or matzah has the same kind of root as going out or coming out, escaping. And it's similar to the word matzah. And so they're saying that finding is actually finding a good death, finding a pleasant death. Now that seems pretty morbid. But as Mary, who's a hospice nurse, will attest to, finding a pleasant death is not really something we should take for granted. Because there are many people who do not have a pleasant death. And having a pleasant death is something we should actually aspire to and actually essentially hope that God gives us one of those things. So finding here is finding a good death. That's what the word euthanasia means, literally. A good death, pleasant death. Euthanasia, that's what it means. Thanos means death, and eu means good. It's good or pleasant death. Now, what does that mean, a pleasant death? Well, the rabbis are now going to give you a little discourse on this. It was also taught in a Baraita, in another section of rabbinic literature that didn't make it into the Talmud. 903 types of death were created in the world. As it is stated, issues of death. And that 903 is the numerical value, the gematria of Totsaot. What is gematria, right? You know, it's the numbers of the Hebrew word, right? So when you add up a Hebrew word, the letters of the Hebrew word all have a numerical equivalent. So an aleph is 1, etc., all the way down to taf. They all have numerical equivalents. And the one that you all know, of course, is chai, 18, right? Right? 18. Chai is, yud is 10, and chet is 8. 10 plus 8. So you all know a little bit of gematria. But gematria is all over the Talmud. And sometimes the rabbis use gematria to explain something. So here they just did. They said Totsaot actually refers to the 903 different ways to die. What is that? 8 million ways to die or 1 million ways to die, whatever that movie was. It's a few different movies that have that. Yeah, the rabbis say there's 903. It'd be hard pressed to come up with 903 on our own, but I guess a doctor could tell you there's probably well more than 903 ways of dying, but it's a lot, right? So gematria is that numerical equivalent, the numerical equivalency. So sometimes the rabbis will come up with very clever versions of gematria. This is the first one that we've seen so far, but as I said, you're going to see it. You're going to see it. And again, the word gematria is a Greek word, folks. Sounds like something in Greek. Geometry. That's what the word means, geometry. Yeah, but in the Talmud, in rabbinics, it became the math of meanings, the math of messages. And the rabbis apply gematria to the Torah, to the Bible, right? So they'll find words in the Torah and say, well, that word adds up to this many. And there's some wonderful gematria lessons, and the rabbis will talk about how certain words add up to certain numbers. But here's the 900. Here's a little bit about the 903. We're not going to get all of 903. Don't worry. It's one paragraph. I'm not going to get into all of it. The Gemara explains that the most difficult of all these deaths is croup, askara, while the easiest is the kiss of death. Croup is like a thorn entangled in a wool fleece, which when pulled backwards tears the wool. Some say that croup is like ropes at the entrance to the esophagus, which would be nearly impossible to insert and excruciating to remove. The kiss of death is like drawing a hair from milk. One should pray that he does not die a painful death. Well, that's added thing here. But let's just mention that again. What's croup? What's croup? Really bad cough. A death cough. It's a cough that, as somebody was dying with croup, the rabbis clearly said that is a horrible way to die. So they placed that there at the top. And the most pleasant way to die is what they call the kiss of death, which is what they believe Moses had when he died. When God took Moses' spirit, he kissed him on the lips. And that's reserved for the most righteous people. Most righteous people don't feel it at all. What do they say? It's like plucking a hair from milk. It's an interesting image. but it doesn't, you pluck the hair out and it's almost like it, wasn't there. It doesn't really leave you saw it, it was there, and then it's not there. And it's like it never happened. The death was not disruptive. It was not painful, and it was not something that people felt like they that they had that's annoying. No, I don't think so. That's a interesting image though. The kiss of death is like drawing hair from milk. So you can remember that image. That is that's the way you want to go. Any questions about that? Well, along those lines, Rabbi Yochanan said, the time of finding refers to a respectful burial, for which you should also pray, right? Supporting Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation, Rabbi Hanina said, what is the verse that teaches that the time of finding refers to burial? Here's a line from Job, who rejoice in exultation and are glad when they find a grave. Well, there's the word find. As there are situations in which one is relieved when his body finds a grave in which to rest. Rabbah bar Rav Shila said, that is the meaning of the folk saying, a person should even pray for mercy until the final shovelful of dirt is thrown upon his grave. Now that's not in the Bible. They say right here, it's a folk saying, right? It's a saying. De amre anshe. It's what guys say, people say, right? Amre is say, and anshe in Aramaic is people. It's a people saying. It's a folk saying. Same thing, folk saying. It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Talmud. People said it. But it's interesting that there's this understanding that until you're buried, you're still hoping to find mercy. You're still hoping to find everything go smoothly for you. I mean, you understand that that's why we bury somebody with respect. That's why we don't leave the cemetery until we know the person's going to be buried.
Is that also why we don't say Kaddish until they're buried? That same reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I don't know if it's this, I don't know. I don't know if it's really the same reason, but one would say that until the person's buried, we don't say Kaddish because maybe the point is because we don't know that the person has found a good burial yet. Until the person's buried, we have an obligation to do that, which is why it's considered such an important thing to do, to bury somebody and to actually take part in some of the burial yourself, because it's an act of mercy. A person should pray for mercy until the final shovelful, which means when the person is putting shovelfuls of earth on you, they're doing it as an act of mercy. It's a hard thing to do. I mean, I don't like doing it, but we feel that it's an act of mercy because we know that we're doing something that, the saying is, there's another saying we have in, I think it might be in the Talmud. I don't know if it is, that one of the things that's so important about burying somebody and why is it such a holy act is because it's an act that we know will never be, we can't expect anything in return for it. The person who we buried is not going to do something for us. So when we act in a way, sometimes with people, we say, well, I'm going to take care of them, so they take care of me, right? This person can't do anything for you anymore. And yet you did something loving and respectful for them without expecting anything in return.
Very interesting. This is kind of new to us, at least to me.
Have you ever heard that before? That burying somebody is something you can never get repaid for by that person?
I have. One of the most important things, participating in this service. Right. is one of the most important things we can do.
No, I learned that too, but I didn't know.
John is not being 100% accurate. He's there for the Brents.
Right, well, only if there's Brents.
He's only digging. He's only digging for the Brents. No, that's not true. Sometimes he just comes for the Brents. I'm just kidding. He's always good.
It's questionable.
Yeah. No, it's terrible. He doesn't do it. He always comes to the minion. He comes to the minion. He comes whether or not there's Brents. He does ask if there's going to be Brents, but he's already there. He's already there. He's already come. He doesn't say to me ahead of time, is there going to be Brents? He's there already.
My mom's and my dad's, they might have loved to be Brents.
I was at a funeral today. There weren't many people there. It was actually Wendy Hirsch's, well, it was in-laws, Machatonim, as we say in Yiddish. It was Wendy's sister-in-law's mother who died. So Wendy was there. There's not many people there, but they were literally going to Brent's after because there weren't that many people.
You needed a minion?
No, I think we had just barely a minion. But, look, this is one of the reasons why some people, I don't do this at all. Don't get me wrong. But there are people who will not leave the cemetery until the earth has all been put back. Yeah, oh yeah. I've been there before. I mean, I've been there many times where people won't leave until they've done the work themselves.
In John's defense, he asks if there's gonna be Brents, even if it's like a 4th of July party.
Yeah, I know. It's not just for death.
So it's not.
John's expecting Brents all the time. He's still expecting it after Talmud study. He's saying, when's the Brents coming? I've been here for over a year now. There's no Brents. So he that's his Metzia. He's looking for it. He says, I want to find Brents. But yeah, so here's an interesting thing that finding could be finding a good death. And also they said, even finding a burial. So they went from finding a wife to finding death to finding a burial. See the connection, right?
Where's children?
He's going right through that. No, they went right past it and it's not coming.
Now that we're here, can we just touch quickly without me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is it 48 hours?
Oh, why are we supposed to bury somebody right away? Well, it's supposed to be as soon as you can, which means maybe that day. But the reason is that in the ancient world, we couldn't mummify people. We were not supposed to mummify people, which means we're not supposed to do any kind of embalming on them. And if you don't bury somebody within 24, 48 hours, you got a mess on your hands. And so if you embalm people, if you take out their without getting disgusting, but if you take out their fluids, then you can bury them days later, but you can't if you don't do that. And Judaism believed you didn't do that. You couldn't take out any part of a person after they died, so you had to bury them whole. So because you had to bury them whole, you had to bury them fast. Those two things together. And again, people said, well, maybe the fact that it was in the Middle East had something to do with it. If it had been like in Norway or something, they wouldn't have, they said, we can just leave them outside for a couple of days. It's not going to do anything. That's possible, but I still think that Judaism also saw it as being respectful to have the person placed, out of their sight immediately. And again, it's not because we don't want to see the dead person. As the dead person, we have a tradition. People ask us all the time about open casket. The reason why we don't traditionally do open casket is because it's seen to be disrespectful to the person, because we can see them and they can't see us. Now you can say, well, they've been made up, and yeah, but they didn't make themselves up. We don't know whether they like the way they look. And so because the person can't control that, we're not supposed to do that. And again, I feel that way even when I see somebody in the hospital. And, one of the reasons why I always ask if it's okay for me to go, especially, I'm being serious now, especially for women, is because sometimes women get very upset if you see them in the hospital and they're not the way they want to be presented. And look, they can't control it, so you have to be careful. You have to do what's respectful, and I definitely don't want to upset somebody by going there. Right, Mary?
Yes.
So we have to be respectful to people. when they're, and at all times, but if they're in the hospital, if they're in the process of dying, yeah, I mean, look, I get very, like I showed you, I showed you this earlier, John. My friend asked me to take a picture of his brother who's in ICU. I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I felt uncomfortable doing it because he wanted to see his brother, and I get it. I did it for that reason, but there was something wrong about it. I felt like I encroached on his ability to, like, he can't control the way he looked, and it was like hard to find a good angle where it wasn't disrespectful to him. So I don't know. I try to be respectful to people when they're in the hospital. I definitely will defer to the family whether they want to make sure they put a sheet over the person when I'm in there, even if they haven't passed yet. So
With your family, so
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
the ground is frozen.
Can't bury him. They have to put him in a storage place
No,
until they.
even the
Oh yeah,
image is-
yeah. They don't bury him until the springtime.
So
They don't have a
it's pretty
choice.
good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You have to do the funeral right away, but you basically put him in a storage place, in like a temporary burial place.
In the freezer?
Yeah, but it's like a
Not
crypt.
all.
It's like crypt. It's like a
Oh,
crypt.
it's like.
It's like a crypt. And they reinter them. Yeah, it's a problem. I've had it. I've had it happen to family. I've had it happen. And I remember one time when at my grandmother's funeral, she died in April, and it just started thawing. They were like, there was a question of whether they could do it. It's kind of colder that, a little later, right on the border. Like April was like, it was during Passover. It was right on the border of when they could do it. But I remember I'm like, oh gosh, I would have been terrible. Because I would have come back for her burial. I mean, I would have come back for that. But I've had that. I mean, I haven't had where I've had to go back for the burial, but I know people who have. And it happens, man. You have a person who passes away in February or December or whatever, sometimes even November. Right now, um, it's weird when I think about when I go back to Minnesota and I have, like, even though I wasn't born there, all my parents were born there, 3 of my 4 grandparents were born there. I go there and I go there and I spend a day at the cemetery. Like I literally, I almost all the time I go there, I'll go to the cemetery for one of the days that I'm there. And I go there every like 2 or 3 years. But we go to the cemetery, and there's like there's cemetery. There's a big cemetery there, and it's like there's like 50 of my relatives
Well,
there.
when we go to, Illinois, that's what we do. We already have a lot of family, and it's like 3 or 4 different.
Yeah.
Cemeteries within like 5.
Now this is one cemetery, and like I have my mom's and my dad's side of the family. Like there are 3 grandparents have family that are buried there, so it's pretty wild.
And it's not-
Yeah, but I have been there in the winter when I've been to visit there, and I've seen funerals go on there, and they couldn't bury them. I'm like I remember as a kid I thought, whoa, that's a heavy duty thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like your Scandinavian heritage, Glory. I don't know what they did. Probably like they may have
Fed 'em with fish.
burned them too, like done like a Viking burial. I don't know. Oh wait. So I just showed it to you. I don't want to show it to you ahead of time. Okay. I hope you didn't look at that. So shoveling earth in a grave. Guess what the next one is? Not what you maybe would have thought. Marzutra said the time of finding, first of finding a
Oh my gosh.
I told you it's funny. I told you it's funny. So they put a little explanation here. Literally the part in bold is the part that it actually says. Marzutra said the time of finding a toilet. And then it goes, in the West, in Eretz Israel, they say this explanation of Marzutra is preferable to all of them. So all the other ones you read, a wife, a cemetery, a good death, all that stuff. No, the best find, the best mitzvah is a toilet. Oh my gosh, that's so funny because it's true. I told you it's funny because it's true. Anyone who's been looking for a toilet and can't find one and finally finds one, oh my gosh, there's nothing better. That's what they said. That's the best answer.
Kings too.
Best answer. Where does that come from? Well, it says right here in Kings, and there is a biblical answer for it. they destroyed the pillar of Baal, they tore down the temple of Baal and turned it into toilets, as is still the case. Now, the words in Hebrew are they took the pillars, tore down the temple, right? And then it says le motzaot ad hayom. Now Gloria, you can look back on verse 27. What does it say? 2 Kings 10, chapter 10, verse 27. It's how they translate this word motzaot, which
Okay,
they probably didn't translate that word, but verse 27.
they demolished the sacred stone of Baal and tore down the temple of Baal, and people have used it for a latrine to this day.
Yeah, as is still the case, is the way that it's read, but the words in Hebrew is motzaot, which you could say is, and you'll find it there to this day. It's found la motzaot ad hayom. You'll see it, and you'll find it there today. We still use the same words in English, and you'll find that's the case, right? You'll find it there. You'll find it there. So there is a word for there's a place where they found a toilet, where they say you'll still find the toilets there. You'll still find the latrines at that place where there was a pillar of Baal. Again, it's a stretch for where they can find the word motzah when it's referred to toilets, but they found it. And not only did they find it, some people say, again, the words here is adifa mikulu, which in adifa mikulu is, and that's the best answer. That's the best answer. So that's the best of all of them, is what the literal thing is. And that's the best one of them all. So that was a little discussion about a Metzia. What are the best finds? Finding a good wife, finding a good death, finding a good burial? No, finding a toilet. I want to find a toilet. It's amazing. So you'll find everything in the Talmud, including discussions about how wonderful it is to find a nice bathroom. And again, look, they explained around it that, they didn't have sewage systems and you have to go find a place. But the Romans were really good at building toilets, which is one of the reasons why the rabbis had a problem with the Romans, because on one hand, they hated the Romans because they were brutal and horrible people who crucified and killed and massacred lots and lots of Jews. But they were really good at building toilets and bathhouses. And so the Jews had to kind of respect them at the same time as they said, they're really good at building infrastructure, but they are terrible, terrible people. By the way, it reminds us a little bit of the Nazis too, who were really good at building stuff, but were really, really evil people. So, in that case, the Jews didn't really have a choice. The Romans really gave them kind of a choice of either following along or dying. The Nazis didn't really give us one, but good builders are not necessarily always good people. All right. So that little tangent on finding, we get back to the synagogue. And here it says, Rava said to Raphram, that was his name, Raphram bar Papa, let the master, the son of Papa, right? That was again, Papa doesn't mean father, but anyways, let the master say to us some of those outstanding statements that you said in the name of Rav Chisda with regard to matters of the synagogue. So Rava said to this other rabbi, come on, Rabbi, teach us some of those sayings about the synagogue. And Raphram said to him, Rav Chisda, right, his teacher, used to say, what is the meaning of the verse? The Lord loves the gates of Zion, more than all the dwellings of Jacob, from Psalms. Another one of Psalms we're going to get to. This means that the Lord loves the gates distinguished Metsuyanim through the study of halakha, as they are the gates of Zion. The outstanding gates more than the synagogues and the study halls. Although those places are the most outstanding of the dwellings of Jacob, they are not engaged in the study of halakha. So what did they say? They said, what are the buildings he loves the most? What are the best gates? What are the best gates? And this is what I said. We're going to get into this discussion of whether it's better to be in a synagogue or whether to be in a house of study, to be in the Beit Midrash, which is what they call here right there. Betei Midrashot, that's the plural. Beit Midrashot, right? Houses of study. And here's what it says. This concept that halakha is the most sublime pursuit is expressed in that which another rabbi, Rabbi Chia bar Ami, said in the name of Ula. Since the day of the temple, where the divine presence rested in this world, when that was destroyed, the Holy One, blessed be He, has only one place in His world where He reveals His presence exclusively. Only the 4 cubits where the study of halakha is undertaken. So where does God exist? Right here in this room. Only in the place where we study. Well, that's interesting, because that seems to imply that God isn't in a synagogue. God is in the place where we study, in the Beit Midrash. Well, that's interesting. So God is now where we study. You can understand what the rabbi said, what they're doing is so important. The statement has practical ramifications. Oh, yeah, it does. Abaye said it. At first, I studied in the house and I prayed in the synagogue. Once I heard what Rabbi Chia bar Ami said in the name of Ula, since the day the temple was destroyed, the Holy One, blessed be He, there's only one place in the world, only the 4 cubits of halakha, what we just read, alone, from which I understood the significance of the 4 cubits of halakha, and I pray only where I study. So the guy says, look, when I heard that, I don't go to synagogue anymore. I only pray in the Beit Midrash. Whoa. So now we're seeing why the rabbis were having this argument over whether we pray in a synagogue or we don't pray in a synagogue. But it's not that we don't pray, it's that we pray in our place of study rather than the synagogue. Rather than go to a place where everyone's praying, and by the way, the implication is there's people there that are not studying that are coming in to pray, right? So you're praying with the common person, the farmer or the merchant. Do you pray just with the people in your study group? Similarly, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, despite the fact that they had 13 synagogues in Tiberias, they would only pray between the pillars where they studied. Well, that's interesting because it says that in the city of Tiberias alone, there were 13 synagogues. And most of us have been to Tiberias, which is in the Galilee. It's on the Sea of Galilee. It's the big city on the Sea of Galilee. And we know that that was a major center for Jewish life. For a while, after Jerusalem was destroyed, the Jewish community moved up to Tiberias. Now, Tiberias, as you can tell by the name of the town, was not a Jewish town to begin with. It's named after Tiberius, the Roman emperor. The Roman emperor after Augustus. It was a fairly new city when the rabbis went up there. Doesn't mean that there weren't people who lived in the environs of Tiberias, but the Romans built this beautiful city on the Sea of Galilee, on the lake. And they called it Tiberias. It's a Roman name. And so Jews lived there, they studied there, and they had 13 synagogues there, which means there were a lot of places where Jews prayed there. A lot of Beit Knesset, right? B'tei Knesset. This rabbi says, I don't pray there. I don't pray in any of them. I pray in my house of study. And I had a lot of options. 13 is a lot. 13 is a lot of synagogues. So that's in the land of Israel, which, by the way, that gives us a little clue, by the way, that during the Roman period, there were a lot of synagogues in the land of Israel. Because if Tiberias had 13 just in that city, and that wasn't an ancient Jewish city, that wasn't like even some of the other places in the Galilee. This was a large city, maybe a cosmopolitan city, but it wasn't an exclusively Jewish city, hardly, and it wasn't an old city for us. Okay? But again, that's why there's so many holy sites in Tiberias. There's rabbis that are buried all over Tiberias because they wanted to be near the center of Jewish life. So there's cemeteries all over there, and that including is where Maimonides is buried. We've been to Maimonides' tomb in Tiberias, and he lived 1,000 years later, but he wanted to be buried there. He lived in Spain, in North Africa. He was born in Spain, but he wanted to be buried in Tiberias. Okay, look, Rabbi Chia Barami said in the name of Ula, one who benefits from his hard labor is greater than a God-fearing person, i.e. the one who is enthralled by his fear of God, that he sits idly by and does not work. As with regard to a God-fearing person, it is written, happy is the man who fears the Lord. Great line from Psalm 112, who greatly desires his mitzvot. We're actually going to listen to a modern version of that, actually by a Christian group that has these lyrics. Happy is the one who fears the Lord, who greatly desires his mitzvot, which is interesting because that's not the way they translated it in the song. Because in the Psalms, the focus is definitely on happy is the one who fears the Lord, who ardently is devoted to his commandments, to his mitzvot. Which tells us that, again, for Judaism, fearing God is part of, again, following commandments. It's not just fearing God. It says who does the mitzvot. While with regard to one who benefits from his hard work, it is written, by the labor of your hands you will live. You are happy and it is good for you. The Gemara explains this verse to mean that you are happy in this world and it is good for you in the world to come. And regarding a God-fearing person, happy is the man is written about him, and it is good for you is not written about him. So in Psalm 112, it doesn't say this other part, which is it's good for you, which they said is the world to come. So they're saying a God-fearing person is well off, it's going to be good, but a person who works with his hands and labors for God is even better.
Wait. Labors for God?
Well, we'll get to that.
I think it's interesting how it's the use of your hands and not your mind. Some people were, people on the field, either sheep or the flock or warriors. And
yeah, well, there's definitely a sense in this that you can't just sit around and do nothing. Just being a God-fearing person isn't going to be enough. So they are opening it up. You'd think the rabbis are kind of looking down on the common man who works. No. And again, this is
looking down. They're putting
Yeah.
on a festival.
Yeah. Now, we're about to change gears on this, so let me just explain that. This discussion, because it is relevant. There are people who've interpreted this to be, look, the Orthodox in today in Israel feel that obviously that their study is a labor. But that's also partly because it's become problematic. And we know that there are a lot of people in Israel who say there's too many people that are not working and using their hands and are not fighting and are not. And so this has been interpreted in a strange way. It's gotten bad. It's gotten bad in Israel on this. Obviously, these issues have been kind of put to the side, but there's actually still things happening right now where the Supreme Court in Israel just upheld the rule that the Orthodox are going to have to go fight in the military or serve in the military. Maybe not fight, but they have to serve in the military.
There's plenty of ways to do it. I was communicating with
Yeah.
my colleague yesterday about that, because Sam had a question about it.
Yeah.
He thought it was, a way for them to skirt their responsibilities. I said, well, they think they're doing a greater good. And I asked my buddy, who he's religious but not religious, and he thinks it's gonna be a big, big problem.
It used to not be a problem to some extent for two reasons. One of them is there weren't that many Orthodox. They've multiplied and they've now, which they do because they have 10 kids, and they now are creating a situation where it's created an untenable imbalance. That's one of the reasons. There's just too many people who are doing that. And so people in Israel resent it. Now, when we had the survivors of Nova here, one of our congregants asked them a question which I didn't expect, which was, do you resent the Orthodox who don't serve in the military? And one of the kids who was here, sat right here, when asked that question, said no. He happens to be religious, happens to be Orthodox. He said, no, those people who don't serve in the military are doing something important. And we think that I think that they shouldn't be forced to serve. There's another issue, of course, which is that someone who doesn't want to serve shouldn't serve, because the Torah, as we read in Deuteronomy, says people who don't want to serve should not be serving. It's not good for your military. But as John said, there are other things that people can do besides just doing military service. There's national service that they can do for those couple of years. So they're not participating in the same experiences that other people are and the same benefit to their country, which is a legitimate issue, especially since most of them are going to be living off the graciousness of the country, because they're not going to be employed by a company or by the military, or they're not going to be entrepreneurs. They're going to be studying for the rest of their lives. So asking them to do 2 or 3 years of work for the country is really not too much in my estimation, but there's a big issue here.
And
That's one of the problems. Yeah, John.
it's a small country. And another thing he mentioned was, now he's a little younger than me, but he serves. And he says he says, based on his contact, they're having a problem with missions. Men, when you're in theater, it's generally 12 months, maybe 13 months. Between 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 months. Well, we're coming up to the 10-month mark, right? You rotate people out, and that's a mental problem, right? Because it's a psychological problem. So I have no idea how they're gonna fight in the north. And so that's why this comes to a very particular goal.
They are rotating people.
No, I know.
They rotated people out 4 months ago. 4 months ago. 8,
So that's
Well,
6 months.
4, yeah.
So that's 6 months. They're gonna take.
So they are rotating people, but yes, they have a problem that, yeah, the rotation, they have to be able to replace the people that they rotated out, and they took almost everybody at the beginning. So it is a challenge. But so I said, there's 2 issues. One is there's too many people now who are taking advantage of it. There's another issue though, which is that when the Orthodox originally when Israel was established, and the Orthodox who lived in Israel generally there was a cooperation between the government and the Orthodox, and it wasn't as polarized. And what happened was that the Orthodox actually respected the work that the original pioneers were doing to build the country. So the respect went both ways. And I think as Israel has moved away from its pioneer spirit of the first couple of generations of Israelis who all served in the military, who all essentially were living in kibbutzim and collective situations where they were all helping each other almost all the time. I mean, there was a real sense that everyone had a common purpose. Some people didn't like it, and that's why, again, some people left Israel because they were like, I want to have my own piece of the pie. And Israel really frowned on that for the first couple of years. It was a very socialist country and a very communal country and an interdependent country. And as Israel has moved away from that, the Orthodox, to some extent, look down on the non-Orthodox, who they feel are just money-grubbing, people like every other country. And so there's a real sense also of disrespect from the Orthodox to the people who are secular Israelis. And by that I mean that there were Orthodox rabbis who quoted these words, by the labor of your hands you will live, quoted the Talmud and quoted the Psalms line, and quoted like the first chief rabbi, Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Kook. He was very, very supportive of Jews who were not religious, but who were helping to build the infrastructure of Israel. He said that those people are doing what God wants and what God needs to do, which is using your hands to build the country. And so Rav Kook's Zionism was founded on religious Zionism. It was called the National Religious Zionist Movement. Some of his students, some of the next generations, are not as respectful of the non-Orthodox as he was and his original group, because they really did feel that those people that are farmers, that are soldiers, that are construction workers, were doing God's work and respected them. And the polarization that exists on both sides has led to a lot of bad feelings between the groups. Now, it's not so cut and dried. And as I said, the kid from Nova who was here basically told us and said it, I have it on tape, that he doesn't feel that way. I will tell you that there are a lot of Israelis who it's not so cut and dry. They don't say, well, I served in the military, so you have to serve in the military too. He served and he was okay with it. What am I supposed to do? I haven't served in the military at all. So what am I going to say? Well, sorry, you have to. Look, I have my feelings about it, but it's not so cut and dry. It's not like everyone who serves in the military says anyone who doesn't serve in the military is a sponge. I just want to tell you that. So just understand that it's not so cut and dry. But the next section is also about teachers and students and studying, but this one's an interesting one. Let's take a look. Rabbi Chia Bar Ami said in the name of Ula, again another quote of Ula, one should always live in the place where his teacher lives, thereby he will avoid sin. So you're supposed to live where your teacher lives. For as long as Shimei ben Gerah, who according to the tradition was a great Torah scholar and a teacher of Solomon, was alive, Solomon did not marry Pharaoh's daughter. Immediately after the Bible relates the death of Shimei, which is in Kings, Solomon's marriage to Pharaoh's daughter is recorded. So in 1 Kings, at the beginning of 1 Kings, at the end of chapter 2, Shimei is one of, oh, it's not there. But if you look at Kings, it's not going to hyperlink to it because it's not an actual quote. But Shimei was one of David's friends, one of David's contemporaries. And so Shimei was essentially one of Solomon's mentors who taught him the right way. Now, to say that he was a great Torah scholar, that's the rabbis taking a little narrative license with what Shimei did. But they saw him as essentially Solomon's rabbi. So Solomon had a great teacher. After his dad died, he had to have a great inspirational teacher. And it was this guy Shimei. And it says that he dies in chapter 2. And at the beginning of chapter 3, it says that Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. And we know what happens after that. Everything goes downhill for Solomon after that. Well, not everything, because he builds the temple in chapter 5. But his problems start there. That's where it starts, where he marries the Pharaoh's daughter, because that brought in the other religions, the pagan religions, into the land of Israel. And so what does it tell us? It tells us that Solomon, once his teacher was dead, did a bad thing. He wasn't living a good life anymore. The Gemara raises an objection. Wasn't it taught in a Baraita that one should not live where his teacher lives? So they have one teaching that you're supposed to live where your teacher lives because it's going to encourage you to do good things. And the other one, it says you're not supposed to. You should not. It says no. There's another place that says you don't live. And of course, the rabbis say, lo kasha. This is not difficult. This isn't a problem. Let me tell you why. Let me explain it for you. Lo kasha. Of course, it's a problem. There's two conflicting texts, but they say lo kasha, which, by the way, as I said, is also kind of a yeshiva, almost Yiddish expression. That's not a problem. It is a problem, but let me tell you how I'm going to get you out of this problem. Lo kasha. This, which says that one should live where his teacher lives, is referring to a case where he is acquiescent to his teacher and will heed his teaching and instructions. While the Baraita, this other one, says that one should not live where his teacher lives, is referring to a case where he is not acquiescent to him, and that will lead them to quarrel. So if you listen to your teacher and you're going to do right by your teacher, definitely live where he lives.
Sometimes.
If you're really in awe of your teacher and you do what he says,
I'm moving.
then you want to live with them in the same place. But it's an interesting, yeah, turn it off. No, now it's cold. But it is interesting that the rabbis saw something that we don't see as much now, which is that people did not want to let their teachers down, their mentors. And we don't have that so much anymore.
Yeah, we don't care about you anymore.
Well, I'm not, I you know what you're saying, but I know what you're saying, Mike, but the reality is that if
I don't
you,
know if to be honest,
No.
I don't know if I agree with it.
if you live in a community where you're worried that your teacher is going to find out about your failures, you look at it maybe even in a more serious way than you will look at with your parents.
But having my rabbi know about my failures could actually help me.
I guess one could say that could, but that's,
I know I have no failures, but if you knew about them, it could help me.
Yes.
It could help me.
well, but they're talking about somebody who's actually going to listen to the guidance, right? So if the person's not going to listen to the guidance, they're basically saying it doesn't really matter. It also is from a time when the person's rabbi was literally their mentor. It was like they were like an apprentice to them. And so they apprenticed with the person, and then at some point, maybe they had another opportunity, they had another a chance to move out. But the question is, are they going to?
Today, I don't mean to pat you on the back, because I know you have a big ego already. But I feel like I'm a better person the last 24 years that I've known you than I was before.
Well, I
I
appreciate
don't
that.
know if it's because I'm just getting older and wiser, or if it's because of you. I don't know.
Well, look,
Dementia.
That too.
I don't look dementia. That was for those who couldn't hear, that was, but look, I think that people, it works if people feel like they're going to let down, that they're going to let down their community by their behavior. There's a lot of examples of it in the Talmud. Talked about this before, about a culture that's based around shame and a culture that's based around guilt. And Jewish communities are built around guilt, not around shame. The Asian cultures like Japan are built around shame, and that's where you kill yourself after you if you really got into Shogun like I did, you remember that this was serious for people. Saying the wrong thing in front of somebody was enough to force you to have to commit seppuku. So this is real. This was real. But guilt is effective. They're both effective. I don't know. I don't even want to get into which one's better, but the interesting thing about guilt is, even though you say your mom made you feel guilty, Guilt is actually, well, I'm going to tell you our feeling about it and why we would actually say that guilt is actually better than shame. Guilt is actually an internalized feeling of failure, whereas shame is because somebody perceives what you've done as bad, and it's only because you've been shamed that you've now essentially have to do something about it. So shame is really an external feeling or an external situation where it's because of who you are now seen as rather than the way you feel. And again, I know it sounds like we're splitting hairs, but it's actually something really important, because if you have an internal feeling of guilt about doing something, then it actually, it doesn't matter whether everyone else is going to say that to you. Yeah. Whether someone's going to say something to you or whether you're going to be an embarrassment to your family, but that you really, and again, I mean, not to belabor the point, but this is why, families that engage in honor killings to, when they feel that their house has been, their tribe or their family has been shamed, it's really, really, I mean, it strikes us as something really bad. And when we see somebody dealing with that, what we're also, I mean, I know somebody's going to say, well, you don't sound very culturally sensitive. The reality is how can you justify, in my mind, killing a girl who was raped? Like, to me, it's like, it's one of the worst things you're blaming the victim, and you're erasing the shame of your house by killing an innocent person, a victim. But the justification for it becomes, but our house has been shamed, and the only way we can erase that shame is to have this person erased from our family. So it creates, to me, something that is like the consequence to it, the way that it can play out is really, really bad. And guilt is something that, definitely more in the West, and definitely Judeo-Christian teaching is, look, I mean, there's guilt, and we have to deal with that guilt, and sometimes it's pretty serious. Sometimes it requires, I mean, let's face it, sometimes it requires death. I mean, where someone's guilty of a capital crime and they now have to be executed, there's a guilt, right? And but that's not shame, that's a guilt, and that's a consequence of now having to deal with a crime that isn't a perception, but it was actually committed, and is completely, look, sometimes there can be shame and guilt, right? You're ashamed that your family is now going to have to have a person executed. I get that, but it really comes from the fact that we have to deal with the guilt of this person rather than the external perception that this person's been humiliated. And it doesn't really, it doesn't lead to good behavior. Shame doesn't generally lead to good behavior. Anyways, do people feel guilty? Maybe. So again, that little one about our teachers, it works if you feel guilty about it. So the Gemara again returns to the topic of the synagogue, and this is the last, kind of finish with these parts. Rav Huna bar Yehuda said that Rabbi Menachem said that Rabbi Ami said. So that's, well, Rabbi Huna bar Yehuda is one guy. Menachem and Ami are, so it's three people. What is the practical halachic meaning? What's the legal meaning of that which is written? They who forsake the Lord will perish, which is from the beginning of Isaiah. This verse refers to one who abandons the Torah scroll when it is taken out to be read and leaves the synagogue as it appears he is fleeing from the Lord. So this is a practical answer of, when do you leave the synagogue? Well, you're not supposed to leave the synagogue when the Torah scroll is out.
Right. Can't enter either, though.
You're not supposed to come in, yeah, but you're definitely not supposed to leave. And you're not supposed to leave running out, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You're not supposed to run out of the synagogue. So, practically speaking, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Abahu would go out between one person and read the Torah, who read the Torah, and the next person who did so. Since the scroll was closed between the readers, it was not considered to be a show of contempt. What does this practically mean? This practically means that in between, when we're reading the Torah, we're supposed to roll it back up. And most people put a cover over it. The cover that they have, they put over it. Now, that's hard for me to do, and I do it during, especially people see me, I do it with high holidays, and I do it at a bar mitzvah. But it's not easy to do, bar or bat mitzvah. I'll do it, but it's not easy to do, and I don't always remember to do it. But the reason that you're supposed to do it is so that people who go out when in between the readings are not doing anything wrong. So rolling it back up is enough. And I always do that. I always roll it back up. But you're also supposed to put the cover on it just to give it the full honor and to make sure that someone doesn't walk out when the Torah is open in front of them. It's just considered disrespectful. So why is this practical? Because guess what? Every time you close the Torah back up, you have to find where you read. If you could just leave it open, then you just say, oh yeah, that's where we are. We leave the yad there and things open and put a little Post-it note on top of it. I've seen synagogues do that, by the way. I won't do that. But some synagogues will put a Post-it note with the understanding that they're not putting a mark in there, they're just putting a Post-it note. But I don't like that. I think it's disrespectful. So it also can take off the ink. The Post-it note eventually will take off the ink. So, but they do it because they don't want to spend 10 minutes trying to find the place, which if you know the Torah pretty well, you won't do that. But some people don't know the Torah that well, and so they need to do that. I'm finding that I need to do it now because I just can't see anymore. But so it's getting harder. It's getting harder to see. Well, especially with the little Torah. Two things have happened.
Yes.
We almost always use the little Torah for bar bat mitzvahs because the kids have gotten so weak. They're so weak now, folks, that they can't take out the big Torah. And not taking out the big Torah means that I have to read the little Torah, which has little words in it, which are getting harder and harder for me to see. So fortunately, we added some more light up there, so it's a little bit better. But yeah, they're reading the little Torah. I should make them take out the big Torah. We need to toughen these kids up some more. But yeah, the little Torah is harder to see. It's yeah, it's that much harder. But if you also, the good thing is for me is I have a pretty good, I don't have a photographic memory, but I have enough of a memory that if I look down and I see it's 10 lines and it's 10 lines down, it's 5 words over, I can remember that for 5 seconds. So that might not be the case again in another 10 years, but for right now, I can kind of remember where we were. I remember where the word is, but I know some people have a hard time with it, and I wouldn't make somebody. If I'm not the one reading Torah, I'm not going to get very meticulous on this point. So, if I have somebody else reading Torah, I'm not going to say, close that damn Torah. I won't say that anyway. Close that dang Torah. Don't have that open. But there are people who get pretty, I've seen people get, oh, you got to close it. They won't start. They won't let you start until they close it up. I'm like, please relax. But that's where you get this from. You don't do that. Rav Papa raises a dilemma. What is the ruling with regard to leaving between one verse and the next verse? Is one permitted to leave during a break in the Torah reading while the verse was translated into Aramaic? Now, that's not what it says, but it says, ben pasuka le pasuka. Wait a second. What? Well, they just told you what it was. I just read it for you. It literally says between the one verse and the next verse.
You mean Parsons?
They're talking about the Torah. It's saying that when they read the Torah out in the Talmudic period, the Mishnaic Talmudic period, they translated it while they read it. How about that, folks? So anybody who tells you that reading the Torah and translating it in English while we're reading it, now look, we have a Bible, we can give it to everybody. They didn't have one. They didn't have Bibles.
No,
They didn't have books. So some guy sat there and told, there was a guy reading the Torah, and then there was a translator who said, read the Torah.
I've seen you do it, but I saw Alicia from Sedona
Yeah.
also will do that.
Yeah. Well, you should. I don't do necessarily the whole thing,
No.
but I'll do it so that people will know what we read. You translate it. Well, we have the Bible, so if I have, like I pass out the Bibles to say, people follow along. For these guys, for your kids' bar mitzvahs, we put them on a sheet, so they had it right in front of them. But
I read for my part,
yeah, I know, but I'm saying for your kids, I remember we printed out the part so that people would have it. So we want people to know the English.
Sure.
They did too. They wanted the people to know the Aramaic. They were speaking in Aramaic. They didn't understand the Torah, folks.
Interesting. Isn't Aramaic similar?
It's similar,
Yeah.
but it was like translating it from French to Spanish. Similar languages, but they're not the same. The words that they knew for, let's say, whatever the word that, like we talked about yesterday when we read the Psalms, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, the Aramaic versus lama azavtani, or lema sabachthani instead of lama azavtani. The words are a little different. They didn't know azavtani, they knew sabachthani. They knew the Aramaic, sabachthani, which, by the way, sounds a little Arabic, right? Because Aramaic is kind of in between Hebrew and Arabic. No, hardly. Like going back to this, it helps me refresh my Aramaic. But yeah, you all know Aramaic because you know the mourner's Kaddish. You know the Kaddish, and that's in Aramaic. We know Kol Nidre. Now, we don't know it that well, but we do it once a year. Kol Nidre. V'chamarei v'asarei. That's all we know. Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya means a Chad Gadi, one goat.
That's our Passover.
Yes. So you know that song in Aramaic. What? Oh yeah. It's very similar, but it's not the same. So you have a pasuk, right? In Hebrew, a pasuk. In Aramaic, it's pasuka. It's almost the same word. Pasuk, I can figure out pasuk and pasuka, but it's not the same. And this whole book that we're reading is in Aramaic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, can you go out? Well, here the guy says, can you go out? And they say, teku. An answer to this question was not found. So the dilemma stands. A teku, man. This is a new Aramaic word that you just learned. Teku. Toss up, man. It's a toss up. We don't know. You go either way on it. You can go either way on it. Means some people, a teku is, we don't know. We don't have an answer.
If the Torah is out and
But they're saying in between the translations, can you go out? They're not speaking in Hebrew. They're not reading the Torah. They're reading in Aramaic. Can I go out? I know, but they're saying it's not Hebrew, right? It's not that we're not reading the Torah.
it's always taught, Lord's service, you don't leave.
Yeah. But if you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom. So that's a teku. It's a stands. Teku. Stands. So here's a little bit more we'll read. The Gemara states that Rav Sheshet would turn his face away from the Torah while it was being read and study. He didn't pay attention to the Torah while it was being read. Explaining the practice, he said, we are engaged in ours, the study of oral Torah, and they are engaged in theirs, listening to the written Torah. Since Rav Sheshet was engaged in Torah study, he is not considered as one who forsakes the Lord. Well, that's weird. It basically says that this guy, Rav Sheshet, would not actually study the Torah. He was studying the Talmud. He was studying the Mishnah. He was studying the commentary, the oral Torah. Is that allowed? Is that allowed? Seems like that's a little disrespectful. Well, at least there they said, well, studying Torah, it's just not the written Torah, which tells you how much precedence they put on it. But wait, that's not the end of it. Rav Huna Bar Yehuda said that Rav Ami said, a person should always complete his Torah portions with the congregation. The congregation reads a particular Torah portion every Shabbat, and during the week prior to each Shabbat, one is required to read the Bible text of the weekly portion twice and the translation once. So, at least some of the rabbis said, I don't care what else you're reading, you better be reading the Torah portion. And you better be reading the weekly portion that everyone's reading, which is the same thing we've been doing for thousands of years, reading the same Torah portion. Now, that's one of the reasons why we still follow the Torah portions that people read all around the world. Now, some Reform synagogues have moved away from that in the sense that they will read parts of the Bible, or they'll choose parts of the Torah that are different from what other people will be reading. It's mainly for the holidays. The weekly parsha really doesn't change in most synagogues, but there might be parts of the Torah that they will read regardless of what time of year it is. I'll give you one example. The Reform movement started doing the story of creation read on Rosh Hashanah instead of the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. They thought the story of creation made more sense than reading the Akedah. And there's definitely a logic to that. But one of the reasons why I don't like that idea is because every Jew in the world for thousands of years has read the Akedah. So why am I going to change this now? Well, what we did when we had a second day of Rosh Hashanah service is we would read the story of creation on that second day, which I think is a good thing to do. It's a good thing to read the story of creation. It's a good thing to focus on that, but not at the expense of not reading what every Jew in the world has read for thousands of years on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Well, they obviously had a similar discussion 2,000 years ago, because they say that everyone, whatever you're reading, you should read the Torah portion, the weekly parsha. And, by the way, read it twice in Hebrew, read it once in translation, which tells us that the rabbis needed the translation too. And that's interesting. Did they need the translation because they just didn't know Hebrew that well, or do they need the translation so if somebody asked them, what are the words for that in Aramaic, they would know? Now, 100% when they wrote this, the translation was the Aramaic. It wasn't Greek, it wasn't Latin. It definitely wasn't English, because there was no English yet. So they had the Targum. They had the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation of the Bible. The Aramaic translation, the Targum versions that we have, the earliest ones that we have, some of them are very old. And some of them were kept in churches in Jordan and Syria by Aramaic speaking peoples, most of whom who've disappeared. They've left the area, or they've been killed over the years. There aren't many Aramaic speaking people anymore in the Middle East, unfortunately. But we sometimes use the Aramaic translations because they actually preserve better scribal traditions than the Hebrew, the Masoretic text, which we talked about also in the Septuagint. The Greek version has some better versions of certain parts of the Bible than we have in our Hebrew text. And we know that they're old because we have old Septuagint copies that go back 2,000 years that we can say that's a legitimate thing. We found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Targum, we found the Aramaic translations of some of the books. Interestingly, not as many as we found Hebrew books, but the Targum that we found there, the sections of Aramaic that we found there are also 2,000 years old. So they help us also understand a little bit more of Aramaic, and it also helps us in some cases say the scribal tradition we have in our Bibles are not necessarily perfect.
So the Torah is all Hebrew.
Yeah, everything in the Torah is Hebrew, but
What
even,
about the rest of
yeah, the only part of the Bible that's not is a tiny part of the book of Daniel is in Aramaic, which tells you how late it was. If Daniel wasn't written partly in Aramaic, we would say, well, maybe it's an older book. But we do know that it's not an old book. We know that it refers to things from the Maccabean period, and we know that it's in Aramaic, which means it's a really new book for us, relatively new. It's only about 2,200 years old. So, Aramaic, the rabbis also read the Bible. They read it, according to this, they would read it 3 times. 2 times in Hebrew, and 1 time. There you see the word right there, the Targum. The Targum, which is, by the way, the Hebrew word for translation is Targum. They actually called the book the Targum. The Aramaic translation was called just the Targum. The translation, they didn't call it the Bible, they called it the translation. I mean, the Bible means book. It doesn't mean the Torah. It means book, right? That's what it means in Latin. It's book, the Bible. So, let's read a little bit more. Here's an interesting little thing about translation. This applies to every verse, even a verse like Atarot and Dibon, and Yazar and Nimra and Cheshbon and Elaleh and Sevam and Nevo and Bayon. What is that? That's a verse from Numbers 32. It's actually verse 3. While that verse is comprised entirely of names of places that are identical in Hebrew and Aramaic, one is nevertheless required to read the verse twice and its translation once, as one who completes his Torah portions with the congregations is rewarded that his days and years are extended. And so what they're telling us is that even sections that translation's not any different, because it's a list of names. It's a list of names. It's literally, that verse is nothing but names. So it's not any different. But they're telling you, you still read it in Aramaic. You still read it. So they're essentially saying, aren't there sections of the Bible that we really don't have to read? They're going to be the same in Aramaic and the same in Hebrew. They say, no, you got to do it. You got to study it. And why? Why? Because everyone else is doing it too. Don't think that you're out of it because you're a rabbi, because you know this stuff better.
George jumped off the cliff. Would you go too?
When it comes to reading Torah, absolutely. Why? Because your days and years are extended. You're going to live a long life. Rav Bevai bar Abaye thought to finish all the Torah portions of the entire year, which he'd been unable to complete at their appointed time on the eve of Yom Kippur, when he would have had time to do so. But he, bar Rav Difti, taught him, it is written with regard to Yom Kippur, and you shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month, and in the evening, from evening to evening, you shall keep your Shabbat. What does that mean? And again, we're going to finish with this part right now. This one rabbi said, you know what I'm going to do on Yom Kippur? I'm going to read all the parts of the Torah that I haven't read yet. Why? Because there's nothing else for me to do that day. I'm not doing anything else. I'm not going to work. I'm not eating. Let me just read the Torah all day. But he told him, you're not supposed to, because you're supposed to be afflicting your soul. You're supposed to be afflicting your soul from the 9th day, from the night of Yom Kippur, but really from that day all the way to the next night, to the 10th. Right? So from evening to evening. But wait, they just said from the 9th to the 10th. You just opened it up. You just said the 9th you're supposed to afflict your soul? It doesn't really, you've included the 9th day. So what do they say? The Gemara wonders, and does one fast on the 9th? You only fast at the night. Isn't that the beginning of the 10th, right? Isn't that the beginning of the next day? So they're saying, you said the 9th, now you better back it up. Doesn't one fast on the 10th of Tishrei, as the Torah says at the beginning of the portion? On the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a holy convocation for you. So it says it's the 10th day. Now you're saying it's the 9th day. Well, again, you and I know they're talking about the night of the 9th, but now you said 9th, so you better back it up. Rather, this verse comes to tell you, one who eats and drinks on the 9th day of Tishrei in preparation for the fast of the next day, the verse ascribes to him credit as if he's fasted both on the 9th and the 10th. You're not supposed to fast on both days. Tia bar Rav of Difti cited the verse to Rav Beve bar Abaya to teach him that Yom Kippur Eve is dedicated to eating and drinking, not to completing the Torah portions you may have missed. So it's not that you're fasting on both days, because they said, doesn't it say that you're fasting? No, we know you're fasting from the 9th to the 10th at nighttime, but you now opened it up. Well, why do they do that? To basically tell the guy, you're not supposed to be studying on that day. You're supposed to be fasting. But on the 9th, you're also supposed to be eating. And the meal that you have before your fast is considered to be a holy thing. So you're supposed to have a nice meal. And we've always done that. I did that as a kid. We still do it now. We have a nice challah. We have a nice meal.
And then
We
you
usually have
fast.
soup. What?
Okay?
And then you fast.
Yeah, well, for us, we usually get an extra hour or two of fasting because we got to be at shul setting up. So if services start at 8, we got to be there by 7, which means we got to start eating about 5:30, which means I'm fasting about 26 or 27 hours because I got an extra hour or two in there. Yeah, but I'm doing okay. Don't worry. Don't worry about me.
And then there's grants.
Because it says you're supposed to afflict your soul. Now, we will get into the Talmudic discussion on this, but not for a while, because there's a tractate of the Talmud called Yoma about Yom Kippur, and it talks about it. It actually doesn't just talk about it Yom Kippur. Look, we're reading Berachot, and they just started talking about Yom Kippur. So you don't have to wait to get to Yom Kippur to get to Yom Kippur. But washing, putting on perfume, which also is part of the washing, eating and drinking.
Synagogues 2,000 years.
And there's another thing we're not supposed to do. Right? There's another thing we're not supposed to do on Yom Kippur, Mike. Yeah, well, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit more serious than kissing, but yeah, he was being nice. Yeah, you're not supposed to kiss. You're not supposed to, yeah. So those are the things you're not supposed to. I know. Or washed for that matter. Look, I mean, they did not have indoor plumbing on, when they celebrated
Right.
Yom Kippur a long time ago. But they did know, and again, probably because washing in those days included going to a bathhouse and whole ritual. But interestingly, our meal before Yom Kippur is a holy act, and it's also supposed to be part of our
I had a friend
ritual.
that was very religious, and he told me pasta the night before.
Protein.
I don't know.
It'll be easier to fast.
I don't know if that's true, though.
Yeah, it is.
It is?
I've had pasta a lot of times prior to that.
And it's better, it makes you feel better? I've heard people say that you should eat a light meal before Yom Kippur so that you don't get, because if you eat
I've
too
heard that
much,
too.
your stomach gets bigger, like a muscle, and then you feel
But
more
see,
hungry.
the thing is true. When you're in synagogue and I'm praying, I don't feel my stomach. I'm not hungry. It's the break.
Yeah.
between-
No, it's true. Listen, for me, it's not the fasting, it's the not drinking. I
Well,
can
see, I
easily
have to
fast.
Fish and
I-
talk.
Yeah, but it's also, well, this year it's not gonna be as hot because it's not until middle of October. But yeah, it's talking and it's also just getting dehydrated. But yeah, I mean, I'm hearing a lot more people are using the fact that everyone's on medication now. So if the medication says you have to have water with it, you have to have water.
Well, see, what I used to do when I had the question, I just took a very small sip
Yeah.
and that was it. Now I just, I can't, I have to drink.
Well, the important thing is don't use the day to catch up on all your old Torah reading. Guy said, I didn't get around to my Torah. I'm going to catch up. I procrastinated. He crammed for the end of the year. So it also tells you that by this point in time, they were also following a tradition of right after Yom Kippur, we move into Sukkot and Simchat Torah, where we start the cycle over. So he knew he was coming to the end of the year, and he had to finish up. So yeah, we're gonna get back into some of this other stuff in the coming weeks, but we will be in person next week. Yes, we will be in person. And we're gonna read next week where it says, "Don't get into bed with an Aramean woman."
Never.
So just remember that, guys. Aramean, yeah, Aramean. I guess you could say Arabic now, but Aramean woman. But you're supposed to get into we're not going to get into this now, folks. We're going to get into this next week. But why this whole story about not getting into bed with an Aramean woman? It's just something to think about for next week. All right, folks, we will see you next week, God willing. And next year in Jerusalem. No, next week in next week in. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye, thank
Hopefully,
you.
hopefully we'll have Joyce next week with us. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Brian.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye-bye.